Welcome to the third edition of Linguistics of American Sign Language, which was first published in 1992. It was subsequently revised as a result of new linguistic discoveries about ASL. This edition has two new units, one describing the functions of space in ASL, and the other exploring ASL as a medium of artistic expression. There are more than 5,000 languages currently in use throughout the world. And these languages share characteristics and features. People use language to communicate, to share information. There are other communication systems, such as Morse code, semaphore, bird songs, or the dance of honeybees, which share some of the features of language. However, linguistic systems have many more characteristics than these other systems. One shared characteristic is that both use symbols. These other communication systems, such as Morse code, for example, use a series of dots and dashes, or different flags in different positions for semaphore. The dance of honeybees uses body positioning in order to convey information. Languages also use symbols. In English, for example, we can see the written word CAT is a symbol, or the spoken word with the sounds K, A, and T are symbols to represent cat. ASL also uses symbols such as this sign that we gloss as cat. These symbols are also manipulated systematically. Morse code uses a series of dots and dashes in specific sequences to convey information. In semaphore, the positions of the flags conveys information. The honeybees' positioning of their bodies conveys information to the hive. Languages also arrange symbols systematically. We know that the word cat is an appropriate English word, but CWQT is not, because there are no vowels. It does not fit the rules of English. English requires the positioning of consonants and vowels in appropriate sequences. ASL also manipulates its symbols systematically. In the signs maybe and drama, we can see examples of this. The hand shapes are the same on both hands for each sign. We see an alternating movement in both signs. These are examples of the manipulation of symbols. We look at the signs word and money. We notice that each hand takes a different hand shape. The same in the sign for money. And there are systematic rules for this. There are 7 basic hand shapes in American Sign Language that the non-dominant hand can take, while the dominant hand may take any hand shape in ASL. The non-dominant hand is restricted to the 7 basic symbols, B, A, S, O, C, 1, and 5. In the sign word fits this rule. The non-dominant hand takes the number 1 hand shape. In the sign money, the non-dominant hand takes the B hand shape. So these are examples of the systematic manipulation of symbols. Another shared characteristic between other communication systems and language is that the symbols are both arbitrary and iconic. If we look at the drawing of an arrow pointing to something, we could say that that is an iconic symbol. However, the positioning of the honeybees' bodies is considered arbitrary or less iconic. The dots and dashes of Morse code are considered arbitrary symbols. Languages also have symbols that are either arbitrary or iconic. In English, for example, the word cat is an arbitrary symbol. It bears little resemblance to the concept that it represents. But there are some words that are more iconic, for example, twirl, curl, snarl, and so forth. These types of words ending in the RL sound all seem to share a twisting type of meaning. So those words would be considered less arbitrary. The sign wrong would be an arbitrary sign. The sign cat is considered a less arbitrary sign since it bears some resemblance to its referent. Originally an iconic sign, the sign student has lost some of its iconicity over the years. This discussion is that ASL is not simply a language of pictures in the air. Some signs are iconic, but not all of them. The sign student in Italian Sign Language is this, and this is the sign for student in Thai Sign Language. These 3 signs for the same concept student would be considered less arbitrary and somewhat iconic, although the signs used represent different aspects of the concept. Both languages and other communication systems must have a community of users. Languages require people to use them, as well as users of the other communication systems. Semaphore flags would be incomprehensible to people who do not understand the meanings behind the symbols and how they're used. The information of the honeybees dance conveys information only to members of the hive. Languages require a community of users as well. One person cannot create a language and use it by him or herself. These are the 4 shared characteristics between languages and other communication systems: the use of symbols, the manipulation of the symbols, arbitrariness and iconicity, and a community of users. Languages share many other features that the other communication systems do not. One of these is productivity. Languages can manipulate their symbols in ways to convey an infinite variety of sentences, ideas, and concepts. Other communication systems are much more limited. Now, semaphore theoretically could create an infinite variety of sentences, but it would take a great deal of time. The others, the honeybee's dance, the song of birds, are much more static and limited. Another unique feature to language is the relationship between the symbols is clearly seen. Other communication systems do not share this feature. Let's take an English sentence, for example. He sits on the couch. We see the word sits and realize that that relates to he, the person. And we see the relationship between these two symbols. ASL does the same thing. If we look at the sign drive plus the appropriate non-manual, we see the relationship between the two. These non-manual signals have different meanings and affect the base sign drive. In the ASL sentence, the book is on the table, we see the relationship of the book to the table. The idea of location is conveyed through this sentence. Other communication systems do not share this feature. There is no shared relationship of symbols in the dance of honeybees, for example. Another unique feature of language is the creation of new symbols, whereas other communication systems are much more static. The word cupboard in English is an example of the creation of a new symbol. Originally two words, cup and board, the two were combined into one word which has a different meaning now. We think of that as a piece of furniture with shelves that not only hold cups, but can hold sweaters, boxes of cereal, plates, and so forth. Even though it's used for a variety of purposes, we still retain the word cupboard. Languages can also borrow symbols from other languages. For example, the word patio is a Spanish word that has been incorporated into English. And ASL also creates new symbols. For example, the sign brother was originally the two signs boy and the same. Over the years, the two signs have combined to create the new symbol of brother. The sign home was originally the signs eat and sleep. The two signs combined to give us the new symbol home. ASL also borrows symbols from other signed languages. The ASL sign for Italy has been replaced by the sign used by deaf Italians. Now, as I said, these other communication systems do not create new symbols or borrow from other symbols. They're static and limited in scope. Another feature of language is that its users can discuss any domain: philosophy, religion, the arts, science. Any topic can be discussed using language. This is not true for the other communication systems. The dance of honeybee simply conveys the location of food to the hive. The songbirds simply use their songs for mating purposes and so forth. So the domains for information sharing are limited in these other systems. Languages can also be analyzed, and its symbols can be broken down into their constituent parts. The symbols in other communication systems cannot. For example, in English, the word cat can be divided into the symbols k, a, and t, which when combined form the English word cat. The sound s can be added to create the plural cats. Each of the individual sounds k, a, and t have no individual meaning, although the s does carry meaning. The same can be said of ASL. Signs have parts. The sign cat, for example, can be divided into hand shape, movement, palm orientation, and location. So each sign can be divided into its parameters. Symbols in the other communication systems cannot be so analyzed. In languages, a sentence can have more than one meaning, and context will help convey this meaning. For example, this sentence may have two possible meanings, depending on how it's produced. First, I may simply expect a yes/no answer, or I may be asking you if you want to ride home. If I produce the sentence like this, it has still another meaning. This feature does not hold true for the other communication systems. Languages can also convey information relating to the past and the future, as well as the here and now. The other communication systems I've talked about are only focused on the here and now. The honeybees, the bird songs, and so forth. Languages also change over time, whereas the other communication systems are static and do not change. People use language to communicate and to exchange information. A parent and a child can communicate. A girl and a boy can communicate with each other. This is not true in other communication systems. Bird songs, for example, it's primarily the male who sings and not the female, so communication is more one way. Users of a language can also monitor their language use and can self-correct if they make a mistake in what they want to say. The other communication systems do not share this feature. There is no mechanism for self-correction among bird songs or the dance of honeybees and so forth. Languages are learned by members of the community. Children imitate what they hear or see and develop their language in this way. Bees, on the other hand, their communication system seems to be innate and is not learned from other members of the community. Users of a language can also use variations of a language. Signers in New England can learn and use the varieties of signs used in the West. Signers in foreign countries can learn the sign languages of other countries in order to communicate. These other communication systems are much more limited. Honeybees simply communicate with bees, birds communicate with birds, and so forth. They do not share this feature of language. The last unique feature of language, perhaps the most important, is that users of a language can use language to discuss language. Dictionaries can be compiled. Grammars can be written of a language. This is called metalinguistic awareness. These other communication systems cannot analyze their mechanisms for conveying information in such a way. Users of a language have this awareness and this ability. So that we can see that although languages and communication systems share four basic features, languages are much more complex in scope. And because ASL has this list of features, American Sign Language is obviously a language in its own right. Linguistics is the branch of science that analyzes language into four domains: phonology, morphology, syntax, and language use. We'll now focus on phonology. Phonology is the analysis of the smallest unit possible. For example, in ASL, the signs summer and dry are very similar. They share parameters but differ in one. The hand shapes are the same. The movement is the same. The palm orientation is the same. Only the location of the sign differs. The purpose of this difference is to show contrast and the meanings of the two signs. Another example are the signs red and cute, where the difference is hand shape. The other parameters are the same. The signs train and short share the same parameters, except palm orientation. Sit and chair share the same parameters, except movement. Facial movement also disambiguates meaning. For example, the signs not yet and late differ only in the non-manual signal produced on the face. So these all are examples of phonology in American Sign Language. In the early 1960s, a linguist by the name of William Stokoe attempted to divide signs into constituent parts. At that time, it was felt that signs were whole units and unable to be analyzed. But Stokoe discovered three parameters for signs: location, hand shape, and movement. Stokoe also devised a notation system to record the parameters of each sign. Stokoe also felt that the parts of signs were produced simultaneously, in contrast to spoken languages whose parts were produced sequentially. In English, for example, the sounds k, a, and t must be pronounced in sequence in order to convey the word cat. Stokoe felt that signs were different, and that was his view in the 1960s. Stokoe continued to develop his notation system and to record American Sign Language signs, and was later joined by other linguists who began to analyze American Sign Language. But there were some problems inherent in Stokoe's system. In his system, the signs heaven, sign, and children are all notated as being made in neutral space. But specifically where the signs are articulated is not clear in his system. Clearly the signs are made in different places, but his system is not specific enough to describe that. The signs give, number, and none he noted as all being made with the same hand shape, whereas they actually are variants of hand shape. The sign give has a flattened hand shape. The sign number has a little more full hand shape, and none takes the 0 or O hand shape. Stokoe also felt that the parts of the sign congress were produced simultaneously, but we see that the hand must first touch one shoulder and then the other, so in effect it is sequential. The same with the sign understand. It's not produced simultaneously. The hand must first take the S hand shape and then the one hand shape. However, his system could not account for the difference between the one-handed sign die and children. He had only identified three parameters, but later identified a fourth, that of palm orientation, as the distinctive feature between signs like children and die. His system was also not specific enough to distinguish between the variants of the sign deaf. He did not indicate the first and second points of articulation. With the sign admit, Stokes' system does not allow for the sequence of non-manual signals. It begins with pursed lips, which open as the hand moves away from the chest. Current thinking now is that signs are produced sequentially, not simultaneously, as Stokes had originally envisioned. This is another example of a feature of spoken language that ASL shares. Analysis of spoken language allows us to see sequences of consonants and vowels arranged in specific ways to create meaning. Analysis of American Sign Language reveals sequences of holds and movements arranged in specific ways to create meaning. This sequence will talk about how we notate these movements. The sign always or something has no hold. It's simply noted as M for movement. We can also notate the other parameters, the hand shape, the location, the palm orientation, the non-manual signals, which gives us a very specific way of noting this sign. The sign for color has no movement. Although the fingers wiggle, this is termed internal movement, but the hand and the arm basically stay still. We see the same pattern in the sign study. We call this a hold. We note the different parameters of the signs and call it hold. Another pattern is movement hold, such as in the signs my, no, and sit. Hold movement hold is another pattern, as in the signs improve and powerful. Noting a two-handed sign, we need to make a distinction between the dominant hand and the non-dominant hand. The notation of the features of the dominant hand are written above those of the non-dominant hand. Some signs are produced in movement hold, such as school and paper. Spoken languages use a sequence of consonants and vowels. American Sign Language uses a sequence of movements and holds. Again, parallel structures. Thus far, we've examined the sequence of individual signs, but some interesting things occur when signs are put together with other signs. We see variance in these signs, and this has led to the discovery of four features which we call phonological processes. In the sign father and in the sign study, which are both hold signs, when those signs are put together, we add a movement between the two signs. Second process occurs, for example, in the sign good idea. The sign good, which is a hold movement hold sign, and idea, which is a movement hold. When those signs are combined, the hold is deleted. To sign me in form, we see the process known as assimilation, where the me takes the hand shape of the sign in form. Some signs, such as deaf or flower, can change the order of production of the segments, while other signs cannot. The segments of the sign powerful cannot be signed in reverse. We've concluded our study of phonology, and will now turn our attention to morphology. It's important that you understand the difference between these. As you remember, phonology is the study of the smallest contrastive unit of language, whereas morphology is the study of the smallest meaningful unit of language. An example of morphology can be seen in the signs sit and chair, which have a different movement. Similarly, the signs to fly and airplane, window and open window, print and newspaper. We see this variation in movement, which results in a different meaning between the signs. Signs like these are called noun-verb pairs. This is an example of morphology, and we'll be sharing more in the next several units. In Unit 2, we saw one way that ASL creates new signs by deriving nouns from verbs. This unit will focus on another way that ASL creates new signs. If we look at the sign for sister, we see that its derivation is two signs, girl and same, which over time have come together to create the new sign. The sign look like comes from the sign's face, the same, and have combined to create a sign with a slightly different meaning. Similarly, the sign mention, derived from the signs say and name, have led to a new sign with a different meaning. Also, the sign resemble, from the original signs face, strong. The two signs good enough have come together to create a new sign meaning barely adequate. This process is called compounding, and its purpose is to increase the lexicon of the language. In addition to compounding, ASL creates new signs in still another way, through the process called lexicalized fingerspelling, such as this sign, bank. Let me talk about fingerspelling briefly. Historically, people have assumed that fingerspelling was English on the hands, but really, the forms used for fingerspelling are ASL signs that are used to represent English words. It's important that this be clearly understood. For example, if I fingerspell B-A-N-K, each of these is a separate sign that includes a hand shape representing a letter. And we can note these as a hold sign, hold sign, hold sign, hold sign. So a combination of four signs to make one word bank. But when I combine these signs this way, it becomes one sign. This is an example of lexicalized fingerspelling. Other examples include bus, back, early, sail, and many others. Another way of increasing the size of the lexicon is through the use of loan signs. ASL borrows signs from other countries, the best example being the signs for the names of those countries, used in place of the traditional American sign. For example, the signs for Italy, Japan, Sweden, Africa, and many others. This is a result of increased contact between ASL users and users of signed languages in other countries. So far, we've been looking at signs with one basic meaning when divided into their constituent parts. Another category of signs can be divided into constituent parts where more than one meaning is inherent. A good example of this is numeral incorporation. We look at the signs 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and so forth, up to 9 weeks. We see that the number hand shape changes while the base sign week remains the same. If we were to notate this sign, we would analyze it as hold, movement, hold, with the number 1 hand shape. 2 weeks, we would change and use the number 2 hand shape, the 3 hand shape for 3 weeks, and so on. We see that this change in hand shape results in a change in meaning. The base sign week remains the same, but the number of weeks is different. So these two parts of the sign may be termed morphemes. A morpheme is the smallest unit of language that carries meaning. Therefore, 3 has a specific meaning of 3 weeks when combined with the base sign for week. Another example is age, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years old, and so forth. Again, a hold, movement, hold sign where the number hand shape changes while the base sign remains the same. Again, the signs for age are considered to be two morphemes. Money, $1, $2, $3, and so forth up to 10. The base sign dollars remains the same, but the numeral hand shape changes. Each of these signs is a morpheme that combines to create a single sign. Another interesting category of signs includes such signs as awkward or lousy, where the hand shape resembles the number 3 but carries no numeral value. But in 3 weeks, age 3, and $3, the hand shape has a specific meaning and is considered a separate morpheme.
As a visual language, ASL takes full advantage of the three-dimensional space in front of the signer. This use of space serves a variety of functions, which I shall briefly describe. One function of space is articulatory. Signs are composed of articulatory features such as hand shape, orientation, and location. Let's look at location specifically. In the sign dry, the location at the chin has no inherent meaning. Another function of space is morphological. Of the articulatory features previously mentioned, hand shape, orientation, and location in this instance does carry specific meaning. In the sentence first person give to second person, the two locations clearly show the relationship between the subject and indirect object. Space is also used for referential functions. In conversation, a location in space is established for a nominal and then referred to using repeated indexing. The locative function of space is seen in the use of classifier predicates and locative verbs. As an example of a classifier predicate, a signer could use the vehicle classifier to show a car's movement from one location to another. The sign operate is an example of a locative verb. This sign may be produced on the body to show the specific location of an operation. Space can be used to indicate a signer's frame of reference, that is, how things are seen from the signer's perspective. Using a general frame of reference in talking about a chair, a signer would place the sign for chair low in neutral space. To show the chair more clearly from the signer's perspective or relative frame of reference, the chair is placed higher in the signing space. Some signs have intrinsic features. The vehicle classifier, for example, has a clearly identifiable front and back. These specific locations may not be reversed. Signers can make use of absolute frames of reference. The signs for north, south, east, and west have specific locations in space and cannot be changed. Finally, space can be related to narrative perspective. While telling a story about a mother and child, for example, a signer may take on the role of the characters. Body shifts, change in eye gaze, and head positions are used to indicate who is speaking. These are some of the functions of space in American Sign Language.
We've talked a lot about hand shapes and their meanings in ASL, and movements and their relationship in ASL. Now we'll focus our attention on location. Location serves many functions in American Sign Language, but we'll be discussing one type here called classifier predicates. But first we need to define what we mean by predicate, and I'll use an example from English. In the sentence, he is home, the words is home function as the predicate, telling us something about the subject he. Similarly, he is sick is the predicate modifying he. He eats is also the predicate relating to the subject he. In ASL, we can sign he is home, but it's interesting, home is a noun that functions as the predicate is home. He is sick. Sick is an adjective, but functions as a predicate. He eats is similar to the English sentence. Classifiers are different types of signs. For example, we have a vehicle classifier, which can represent a bicycle, a motorcycle, a car, or a bus. This classifier can represent a child, a man, a woman, or a person. This classifier can represent buttons, coins, and so forth. And these signs have specific functions. And now if we look at classifier predicates, we see that they have two basic parts, movement roots and hand-shaped morphemes. Let me show you some examples of movement roots. Now let me show you some examples of hand-shaped morphemes. Now when these two parts combine, the result is a classifier predicate such as car drive by, where location is specified, or dipping out of a container with a spoon. Classifier predicates contain important location information in ASL signs. For example, the book is on the table. The information about where the book is inherent in the sign. Classifier predicates really allow the language to be productive. Some people thought that these signs were merely gestures, but classifier predicates have specific rule-governed structure and function in American Sign Language. In our discussion of classifier predicates, we saw that the hand shapes and movements have independent meaning. We now look at another class of signs that resemble classifier predicates but simply specify location. These are locative verbs. An example would be the finger-spelled sign hurt, which can be put on the part of the body to show where the pain is. Another example is throw. The location is specified in the direction I make the sign. I can use the finger-spelled sign food at the top of my head to mean that I'm thinking about food. The number 33 on my chest can be the number on a football uniform. In these signs, location has independent meaning, while hand shape and movement do not. Although we've discussed classifier predicates in a previous unit, there's a special category of classifier predicates, which are called predicates of perceived motion, signs that show movement, a car driving by, a person walking by, a surface passing under a vehicle, and so forth. Another category of signs are those that are made from the signer's perspective. It shows what's happening from my point of view, a person walking by, a car going by, trees passing me by, a person coming up to me, and so forth. If in telling a general story not from my perspective, I could talk about a friend seated in front of me, I would make that sign at a lower level. If I'm telling the story from my perspective, the sign would be made at eye level. So these are differences in how these signs are used. To continue our discussion of location and how such information is included in ASL signs, we look at another category of signs, this time subject-object-verb agreement. In the sentence I give to you, the subject and object are specified in the location of the sign, not in the movement. Here's some other examples. These are subject-object agreement verbs. There's another category of verbs that we call plain verbs, which do not specify subject-object information. For example, the sign punish. There is no information in the sign about who is punishing whom. That must be added with specific pronoun signs. Another example is the sign for love, which again cannot specify subject-object agreement. So an ASL has two categories of verbs, plain verbs and subject-object agreement verbs. We continue our discussion of location in ASL by focusing on two categories of signs, pronouns and determiners. Examples of pronouns include you, me, he, the two of us, the three of us, the four of us, and so forth. If I'm telling a story and say that my brother told me something, and I can use this pointing sign to represent my brother. This is an example of a pronoun. ASL has another type of pointing sign called a determiner that functions a little bit differently. Determiners must occur with nouns. In the sentence, "The boy is silly," I add this determiner, which relates to the noun boy. I can also sign the sentence this way, or the determiner can be produced simultaneously with the sentence, "The boy is silly." Determiners and pronouns are other ways of conveying location information in ASL. This concludes our discussion of location in ASL. We now focus our attention to the topic of temporal aspect, which means the incorporation of time element in verb signs. We're going to look at the base sign for study and how it can be modified to show a variety of different meanings. Here's some examples. We see that these different movements convey different meanings in the sign. The base sign for study does not move. We would call that a hold sign. But when we inflect the sign for temporal aspect, it becomes a movement sign, or a movement hold sign, depending on the structure. So we see that temporal aspect is conveyed through the change of structure of the base sign. We've seen various examples of ASL morphology, and I want to talk now about two important morphological processes: derivational morphology and inflectional morphology. The sign chair is derived from the verb to sit. The finger-spelled sign bank is derived from the four signs B, A, N, and K. Compounding is also an example of derivational morphology. Inflectional morphology adds grammatical information, such as over time or again and again, to a base sign. Subject-object agreement is an example also of inflectional morphology. Derivational morphology is used to build up the lexicon. It's interesting to note that some signs in ASL have been created through the derivational process and then go through the inflectional process. The finger-spelled word no became the verb to say no to, and now is inflected for subject-object agreement. It's important to remember, too, that all languages share these processes, derivational and inflectional morphology. Our final unit focuses on time in ASL. Remember, languages are not constrained to the here and now. We can talk about things that happened in the past or in the future. ASL discusses time through the use of the timeline, which involves a body shift or lean to convey past or future. ASL makes use of specific time signs such as yesterday, tomorrow, future, later, or recently. Time can also be conveyed through numeral incorporation, as in the specific signs for numbers of weeks, numbers of months, numbers of years, and so forth. Habitual time can also be expressed. For example, I work Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. I go to the club on Saturdays. I go bowling every other Monday. All of these convey time in American Sign Language. The third area of study that we'll be looking at is syntax. Syntax differs from morphology and phonology because it focuses on word order or sign order, or how sentences work together in a structured way. ASL syntax is a very complicated system, and it might be best to explain it by first giving some simple sentences. There are two categories of simple sentences, those with plain verbs and those with agreement verbs. Examples might be this, or in these sentences, which might be translated by the father punishes the child, we can see the sentence father punish child or child father punish, using different word orders. Simple sentences with agreement verbs, first person give to second person, or first person give to second person, first person pronoun copy. It seems that the basic structure in ASL is subject, verb, object, but object, subject, verb is also a possibility. As I said, ASL syntax is a very complicated system, and non-manual markers help differentiate sentence types. Here are some examples. So you see the importance of non-manual signals in differentiating sentence types. At first, when learning ASL, it's important to understand what an ASL sentence is. Once you're comfortable with that concept, we can analyze each of the individual signs by looking at their function in the sentence. Do they function as nouns, as predicates, as adjectives? By identifying their functions, we can identify the lexical categories to which the signs belong. There are two types of lexical categories: major and minor. Each of these has various examples that we'll be looking at next. Now let's look at major lexical categories. The first type are nouns. Nouns name places, things, people, proper names, and so on. For example, the name sign David at the temple is a noun referring to a specific person. The sign Chicago names a place. It's a noun. Signs like computer or idea are both nouns referring to things. An interesting aspect related to nouns in English is the concept of pluralization, showing more than one. In English, we add s or es to the noun to show the concept of plural. Pluralization occurs a little differently in ASL through the use of repetitive motion. The signs brothers or sisters has this repetitive motion which indicates plurality. Not many signs do this, only a select few. For example, the sign dog has a repetitive motion but does not indicate plurality. Likewise for the sign cat.
Those movements are specific to those particular signs and do not indicate plurality. It's this specific movement with the signs brothers and sisters that indicates plurality. Another way of indicating plurality is the addition of specific signs, many, few, or some. These can convey the notion of more than one. For example, in the sentence, "Many cars are still new." We see the sign many at the beginning of the sentence that relates to cars showing more than one. We could drop the sign many and sign, "Those cars are still new." The index finger in the sweeping arc shows the concept of plurality. We've talked about nouns. Now we'll look at predicates, which I will abbreviate PRED. Predicates tell us something about the subject of a sentence, and all languages include the concept of predicates. ASL is no exception. In ASL, verbs, adjectives, and nouns can function as predicates. I'll give you some examples now. We'll look at a verb functioning as a predicate. Pro 3, play. Play is a verb, but in that sentence it functions as the predicate. Another example of a noun predicate. The boy is home. Home is a noun, but in that sentence it functions as the predicate. With an adjective, the house is yellow. Yellow is an adjective, but in that sentence it serves as the predicate. The yellow house is old. In this sentence, yellow is an adjective and functions as such. Old is an adjective, but functions as a predicate. In the sentence, the small dog is sick, small is an adjective, as is sick, but it functions as a predicate. The next two lexical categories we'll be talking about are adjectives and adverbs. Adjectives describe or modify nouns. An example in ASL might be, I told the tall man. Tall is an adjective, modifying the noun man, describing his height. Adverbs modify such things as adjectives, predicates, and can also convey time information, and I'll be describing each of these functions. In the sentence, I told the very tall man, there's an emphatic movement plus a specific non-manual signal that conveys adverbial information within the adjective sign tall. Another example of an adverb modifying a predicate. The child sits for a long time. Sit is the predicate, but the movement conveys the length of time. So we have a predicate with adverbial information all included in one sign. Another example that includes a non-manual signal, the man drove aimlessly around. The adverbial information is contained in the non-manual signal and in the movement, all incorporated with the sign drive. Another example, Anne is not hungry. The negative head shake conveys the adverbial information, which is signed at the same time as the sign hungry. The addition of specific signs like tomorrow in the sentence, I'm off tomorrow, allows us to use adverbs to convey specific time information. We've concluded our discussion of the major lexical categories. Now we'll be looking at the minor lexical categories, and there are 5 of those. The first category we'll be looking at is determiners. In English, words such as a, an, and the are determiners. ASL uses determiners, although in a little different way. For example, in the sentence, the girl took off, the index finger conveys information about a specific girl. It's a determiner. In the sentence, the man is silly, again the index finger conveys information about a specific person. It's a determiner. The next category we'll look at is auxiliary verbs.
abbreviated AUX. Examples of these in ASL include the signs must, can, will, should, and finish. These are auxiliary verbs. In the sentence, Pro 3 must eat, must is an auxiliary verb, conveying information related to the predicate verb eat. Another example. Pro 3 might eat. The non-manual signal and headshake conveys the information of might related to the predicate eat. Our next category is prepositions, abbreviated PREP. English examples include the words under, on, above, and off. These are English prepositions. ASL uses prepositions, although in a little different way. Classifier predicates can function as prepositions. Let me give you an English sentence and contrast it with an ASL sentence. In English, my friend walks by. The preposition is by. In ASL, that same concept would be signed like this, where the movement of the sign walk conveys the starting and ending points. Agreement verbs can convey prepositional information. In an English sentence such as, John gives something to Anne, the word to is the preposition. In ASL would be signed like this, Anne, John give to. The concept of to is incorporated into the movement of the sign give. An index finger can also indicate prepositional information. In English, we might say, he lives in Chicago. In is the preposition. In ASL, we would sign it Pro 3 live index Chicago. The index conveys the prepositional information in. The next category is conjunctions, abbreviated CONJ. In ASL, these are signs such as but, understand, or plus. Let's look at some examples now. Pro 3 brings the TV, the shelf, plus the sofa. Whether the play is sad or happy is unimportant. You must pick the red table or the red chair. You can go to the store if you help Mother first. Our final category is pronouns. Pronouns are words or signs that replace nouns. In the sentence, the girl took off, we establish the girl's identity, and later on, to talk about her again, we use the pronoun index finger. It means the girl that we originally spoke of. It's a pronoun. Another example, the sentence, the three of us leave, the sign, the three of us, is a pronoun. Pronominal information can also be incorporated into agreement verbs. For example, in the sentence, I give you, the concepts of I and you are included in the sign give. Pronouns, however, cannot be incorporated into sentences using plain verbs. In the sentence, do you like me? The three signs, you, like, and me, must be signed separately. That information cannot be incorporated into the verb. We've been talking about the phonology, morphology, and syntax of ASL. Now let's look at semantics. Semantics is the analysis of meanings, whether of individual signs or of sentences. I'm not going to go into much depth about this. I'm simply going to give you some examples which relate to the text in the book itself. Denotation deaf. Connotation deaf. The sign color is an inclusive sign that includes the meanings of color signs such as yellow, purple, blue, and red. Another is the term sign language, which incorporates the meanings of ASL, LSQ, and LIS. The concept of the sign hand is incorporated in the concept of the sign arm, but not vice versa. A fingerspelled word and its sign are synonymous: bed, car, busy. Signs such as large or small are gradable. They can be adjusted to show specific sizes. Classifier predicates can also show size, for example, in the signs limousine or VW bug. Alive and dead are non-gradable, but through language use, signers have come up with a sign to mean half dead. Husband, wife, teacher, student, depressed, tired, disappear, thrill, happy, appear. Linguistics, fall into. Ideas, depleted. Feeling, excitement, depressed, pity, sensitive, sick. Not, deny, refuse, blame, suffer. The cat chases the dog. The dog chases the cat. The dog chases the cat. Joan loves pizza. The key opens the door. A tornado destroyed the trees. I've eaten. I sit for a long time. The man is silly. A man is silly. Pro 3, take off. The sentence we gloss, home you, is an interesting sentence which can have a variety of meanings depending on the context. It can function as a request. If a friend and I are at a party and he asks me, home you? What he's really saying is, can I have a ride? It can function as a command. If I've worked overtime night after night, the boss may sign home you, but he's really saying, get out of here. It can also function as a complaint. If my work has been barely adequate and I'm trying to leave early, and the boss catches me and says, home you? I know he's really unhappy with my work. Up to now we've discussed ASL phonology, morphology, and syntax, and examined some of the basic structures. Now we'll see how these structures affect what people do when they communicate. And this domain is called language use. There are many categories of language use: variation, historical change, discourse, bilingualism, and language contact. People use variants of signs all over the country. One area of the country may use this sign for birthday. Another may prefer this sign or this sign. White signers sign differently from black signers. Some examples are boss, school, and flirt, as done by white signers, and in this way by black signers. Signs change over time. Cow was originally a two-handed sign, but over time has become one-handed. The sign for will, originally made near the waist, is now made at shoulder level. The old two-handed sign for telephone has given way to our one-handed sign. Discourse can occur in a variety of situations. Discourse can be monologic, dialogic, or can occur in a group setting. Signs can be made formally or informally. For example, the signs coffee or people. More formally are made with two hands, but can be done informally with only one hand. These variations can be used in a variety of situations. Deaf people are, to a certain extent, bilingual in both American Sign Language and English. ASL can be used for everyday conversation, while English may be accessed through print media and closed captioning. Language contact is another type of bilingualism in the deaf community. I will discuss two types, although there are many others. As I've already mentioned, ASL borrows from other signed languages in order to increase its own lexicon. A second type of language contact occurs when ASL users interact with English users, giving rise to a third system. These are some of the many aspects of language use in American Sign Language.
ASL is not only used for everyday communication. In skilled hands, it can express a wide range of artistic forms. Let's look at some of them. Storytelling has a long history in the deaf community. There are different types of American Sign Language stories, and I'd like to share a few of these with you. A to Z stories, also known as ABC stories, tell a complete narrative with each sign representing one of the 26 hand shapes of the manual alphabet, signed in alphabetical order. Here's part of an A to Z story about a car race. A, the driver's hands on the wheel. B, the back of the car raises slightly. C, lights flash down the tower. D, front of the car raises up. E, tires screech. F, spectators' eyes follow the car zooming off. And the story continues until it ends with the Z hand shape. Numerical stories use the number hand shapes from 1 to any desired number to tell a complete story. Here's part of one. 1, hey you. 2, look at me. 3, that's lousy. 4, you made that up. And so on to the number 11, ending with got it? A complete story told with the numbers 1 to 11. Stories can also be told exclusively with classifier predicates. A vivid visual description of a car can be created with classifiers. The various hand shapes describe the car's body, its tail fins, tail lights, rims, and so on. A complete picture of the car is painted in the mind's eye of the viewer. This is a very rich, creative art form. Another example of an ASL art form is percussion signing. A performer signs in a very rhythmic style, often accompanied by a bass drum beating out the rhythm. When an instrument is not used, the audience often gets involved, providing the rhythmical accompaniment for the performer. This is a relatively new art form, which began at Gallaudet University football games in the 1940s. To the beat of a drum, students have used percussion signing through the years to cheer their team on. More recently, percussion signing was seen during the Deaf President Now events at Gallaudet in 1988. ASL is also used extensively in the field of drama. Students often study drama at schools for the deaf. Skits, or full-length theatrical productions, are often performed at deaf clubs. There are professional theater groups, such as the National Theater of the Deaf, which enjoys a worldwide reputation. Additionally, deaf-related productions are performed by local theater groups and colleges and universities. Recently, television shows and films have appeared which prominently feature the use of ASL. Deaf humor is very popular in the community. Audiences appreciate a skilled performer's facility with ASL to incorporate plays on signs to humorous effect. A well-known story about a deaf giant will illustrate this. A huge, deaf giant lumbered into a town. The tiny townspeople fled in terror. A woman fell to the ground. This caught the giant's eye. Scooping her up in his huge hand, he signed, "You are beautiful. I want to marry—" He then concluded that oralism is better. After all, the sign Mary crushed his true love. Audiences especially enjoy the antics of deaf comedians. One popular routine involves the comedian's hands arguing back and forth with each other in ASL. This is very funny visually. Comedians also poke fun at the foibles of deaf people's everyday lives. Audiences very much enjoy the humor of such stories. The final art form I'd like to talk about is ASL poetry. ASL poetry may have existed for many years, but it was not recognized until the 1970s, when it came into its own as an art form. ASL poetry includes a variety of poetic features. 3 of these are rhyme, rhythm, and meter. To illustrate these features, I will use 2 lines from an ASL poem by the poet Vivian Simmons, entitled White Rose. This is not the full poem, but simply 2 lines. Chatting, flowers everywhere, humble rose out there. Colorful flowers everywhere, white rose out there. We can see examples of each of these features. Rhyme is shown through the repetition of the number 5 hand shape. Rhythm is indicated by the repetitive movement paths which the signs follow. Meter is measured in the alternating, 2-handed movement of the signs colorful, flowers everywhere, and rose out there. It's amazing that we can identify these features in 2 seemingly simple lines of poetry. As we've seen, ASL is not simply used for everyday communication. It is a very creative, expansive vehicle for artistic expression.